Welcome in, everyone. We'll give it a second to let everybody come in. Please take the time to mute yourself and post where you're calling from in the chat and what you're excited for our campaign action weeks. Maybe if you joined us for summer school and you have any notes from that. I know we'll have a lot of people coming from that too. So thank you so much for joining us for our fall campaign series. And we'll get started in a second. We got people from all over. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Grace. We're going to start in like 1 minute. So please feel free to keep adding where you're from in the chat. If you went to any of our summer school sessions, if you're excited for these weeks of action, maybe some upcoming ones that you're excited for. How's the weather by you? Okay, awesome. I think we're going to get started. Thank you all so much for joining us as we kick off our Anti-Imperialist Campaign Action Weeks with an amazing webinar tonight. We just finished our amazing 2025 summer school sessions in which we had incredible guests, campaigns, actions, educational webinars, and we're doing exactly that tonight to kick off. While ending the violence in Palestine remains at the heart of our work, CODEPINK is also fighting on multiple fronts to dismantle the war machine, from challenging harmful narratives about China to exposing the Pentagon's bloated budget, from standing in solidarity with Latin America to highlighting the environmental cost of war. This campaign, CODEPINK's Anti-Imperialist Campaign Series, includes 2-week deep dives into each of our campaigns through webinars, articles, social media series. You'll learn not just what we're fighting for, but how we can win. The goal is to bring our campaigns into clearer focus and leave you with action steps like we will do tonight so you can get involved right away. You'll also get to learn more about our amazing campaign organizers behind these movements and discover how each fight is a piece of the same struggle, a world free from war, oppression, and empire. Tonight, we start with some key aspects from our Palestine campaigns. Thank you guys again so much for sticking around through all of our educational programming. And stick around at the end to hear more about what else we have planned for these 2 weeks and beyond. Quickly, I'm going to go over some norms that we always start with for our virtual webinars, just to make sure that everybody feels comfortable in the Zoom and we can use it for future programming. So as always, please be respectful. This isn't a debate, but a discussion. We are not here to mediate arguments. We're here to learn from each other. Be kind, be curious, be ready to take action, and please, above anything else, please stay muted. Put all your thoughts and questions in the chat. We will have a Q&A later, so your questions will get answered, but we record and live stream these classes, so we would love if we could stay muted and have it be a nice run through of all of our amazing programming tonight. So I'm going to pass it to our Palestine campaigner, Janine, to get us started. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Grace. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending tonight. I know it's a Monday evening, so thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to join us today. I'm CODEPINK's Palestine campaigner. My name is Janine. I'm so excited to welcome you all to today's webinar called Tactics for Opposing Genocide, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. I'm honored to be kicking off our campaign focus weeks with this webinar on the really important topic of BDS. As I'm sure you all know, we are approaching 2 years of the most heinous, first ever live stream genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. While we live in this moment of unprecedented horrors, the mobilization the world has taken for Palestine has increased tenfold. One of the tactics people have widely picked up are those of BDS. It's truly important to know that in this capitalist society that we live in, a lot of our power as consumers comes with where we decide to spend our money and what companies we decide to support. Ultimately, our dollars are the ones funding the weapons and technology that is being used to slaughter and starve and surveillance thousands in Gaza. So the least that we can do is minimize that as much as we can by being mindful and principled of who we give business to. I'm really excited to be joined by our special guest, Ashish Prashar, today to talk more specifically about a certain company's complicity in Israeli war crimes. Airbnb has had a role in Israeli occupation for years, with its willingness to list over 300 properties in the illegal settlements of the West Bank. Now, this is problematic for a multitude of reasons, but for time's sake, I'll just give you guys a quick list. Number one, it's illegal under international law because these settlements are illegal to begin with under the Geneva Conventions. Number two, it incentivizes tourism onto settlements and for the Israeli government to continue to bolster the settlements and the settlers on there for more profit and for more tourism. And then number three, it's obvious propaganda that paves the way for corporations to engage in ethnic cleansing of Palestinians collaboratively with Israel, all under the guise of rehabilitating the Middle East, like how we see corporations talk about beachside resorts in Gaza and selling real estate in Gaza once the genocide is over, aka Gaza has been ethnically cleansed. So tonight, Ashish and I will talk about how we can work towards corporate accountability and action steps that we can take against companies like Airbnb that exploit stolen Palestinian land. Now, a little bit about our special guest here today. Ashish Prashar is a political strategist and human rights activist who has advised the Middle East Peace Envoy, UK prime ministers, and London mayors. He currently advises the Global Legal Action Network on its Palestine portfolio, where they're currently working on an active legal case against Airbnb. Welcome, Ashish. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We really do appreciate you, and I know that you are in London, and it is what I am for you. So please, guys, give a lot of love to Ashish, for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So first, I mean, just go ahead and like give a little intro about your involvement with Airbnb, maybe the Palestine solidarity movement in general.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, my past, I worked on it when I was working the Middle East Peace Envoy, worked on the peace process in between 2010 and 2012. I mean, I say peace process, obviously we know nothing ever happened. And, what was very revelatory to me back then was, I think what everybody is seeing today, right? It's not that just Israel, the bad guys in Palestine, and they've stolen Palestinian land. What was really revelatory was the complicity of the United Nations and our Western governments. We go to these meetings, and if you work there, you really see firsthand how there's like a fake settlement, and then like all we end up doing is forwarding the Israeli occupation's agenda as we do that. And that was going back, for me, I'm sure it goes all the way back to Oslo and before, of course. But I mean, for me, in my experience, in my career, that was just very revelatory. A lot of people go there and think we're going to go there and try and make a difference, right? And it was one of the biggest reasons I left the work because it was heinously biased to the Israeli occupation, and my former boss had no agenda, but helping them continue the ethnic cleansing back then, and what I think people have referred to even as the slow ethnically cleanse, right? We're watching this genocide and horror, but it's not, not like it wasn't happening. I want everyone to remember, even just before October 7th, I think, what is it, a couple of thousand Palestinians were killed just in the West Bank. Double whatever claims have been made about October 7th itself. In that revolutionary act, but in essence, they were slowly ethnically cleansing the West Bank and Gaza. So it's really important that we always talk about the entire story, the entire narrative. Since October 7th, this is all, like I said, I gave up my work in politics to just focus on this. Me and my partner is also a political campaigner, have been solely dedicated to this work. We've run no tax for genocide campaigns in the United Kingdom because it's actually legal to not pay tax for war crimes once it's called a genocide, or other forms of ethnic cleansing. We have launched something recently. We're launching in a couple of weeks that has something to do with sports. We have worked on other legal cases to hold individuals responsible for their crimes, whether that's the former president, other businesses and entities, and working with the likes of the Hindu Rajab Foundation to hunt down, track, and arrest, IOF soldiers who around the world are getting, pretending like everything is normal after going and slaughtering children. The fundamental truth is none of that's enough. There's a French saying, "Nous sommes le pouvoir," we are the power. Right. And I think people need to remember that. The thing that institutions and governments fear isn't celebrity, isn't a good set of lawyers. They're scared of you. And I think we need to remember that when we mobilize to do any action going forward, and how that collective can be brought together to cripple a company like Airbnb, a government like the UK or the US, or the entity itself committing the genocide. I look at what's happening in Gaza right now, and I'm watching this flotilla hopefully get there. Obviously, things have happened tonight. And what's been inspiring before we get into the Airbnb case is the unions in Europe saying, if anything happens to the flotilla, we'll strike and shut down Europe, right? In Italy, Spain. And when they mean that, to be very clear, right? But my ask is, why don't you strike before the flotilla leaves? Because that strike with European economies would cripple those economies. And the demand should be put gunboats next to that flotilla, Italy, Spain, France, and protect it. We can do more. Nous sommes le pouvoir. And with that, I'm happy to talk about the Airbnb case, but there's so much we have the power to do as individuals and a collective.
Thank you so much, Ashish. Definitely, I think you have a pivotal role in the movement over there in the UK, and I really your work is amazing, and it's going to continue to be amazing. And I think I want to move on and more into your more legal advising work regarding the case against Airbnb. So maybe just talk more about the lawsuit and the legal cases that Glan is opposing against Airbnb.
Yeah. So basically, GLAN is a global legal action network based out of Ireland and the UK. They've partnered with Al Haq and Sadaka and the Palestinian Alliance, and have coordinated a transatlantic legal action that targets Airbnb in the UK, Ireland, and the US over alleged money laundering, because they're making money. The proceeds they're making are from Israeli war crimes. And the complaint has been made, in the UK subsidiary, because that's where they get all the money. They also list out of Europe. So the High Court action has been taken in Ireland to make sure they cover Europe in that case. And the US, part of the US part is also preservation of records. And that's really important. People go, why do we also file in the US? Because we want to make sure that the parent company doesn't destroy any records of its listings, of its the profits that have been made. They deliberately disconnected the company so they have weirdly self-protection from the decisions they make. But those records show a connection between the leadership in California through to the properties they list in the occupied West Bank and, frankly, occupied 48. If this is successful, this case would set precedent, basically, and major global consequences for business. We're basically saying, by bringing this case against Airbnb, we're saying that no business, no company, no entity should make profits from war crimes. Airbnb, like anybody else, is a choice of who they carry. A choice. And remember that part. They have a choice to do this. They carry out business with whoever they want to. And they're willingly choosing to rent out properties, not just on stolen land, but also some stolen homes, quite literally. We don't know what's happened to those people. You could argue that someone's been displaced, but someone might have been killed. And This is also an entity that is committing a live stream genocide. And the fact that Airbnb are willing to continue the charade and willing to continue to extract money from war crimes says a lot about its company, its foundations, and its leader, Brian Chesky. It says a lot about what their values are, and everyone, including the board, are responsible for these decisions. They have already been through this process, as Jinin has pointed out, that this is not the first time Airbnb have been brought to light by BDS and everybody else. This was happened in the late 2010s, in 2018 or 19, and Airbnb were like about to pull out of at least the occupied territories. And then the fake charge of anti-Semitism make them freak out, and they stayed in. And they decided that they would donate the proceeds of all the occupied listings to a disputed territories charity. Do you know why that language is so important? They believe it's disputed, that it's not Palestinian. That is an indictment of the very thing they're doing. Right? By doing that, they're basically admitting that they are enforcing the occupation of the West Bank. By continuing to let out properties on behalf of settlers who illegally occupy the stolen land, they're supporting occupation, an unclear breach of international law, right? It's beyond, the ICJ ruled for Israel, businesses and other organizations to pull out of all occupied land in 2024. A ruling that was really powerful because it sent the signal that, they will hold people accountable for continuing to operate in that. And remember, because they made the point about business and money because they know that stands up all forms of occupation wherever it exists in the world, right? And at a time when we're witnessing this genocide, businesses like Airbnb could deny services and actually have an impact here. But instead of doing that, they've doubled down and continue to list properties, even at the appeal of people who've reached out to them, whether they are the former property owners or landowners who are Palestinian, or other organizations like third-party organizations like Amnesty have called this out, in the past. But they continue to do this. And this will be the first ever case to apply money laundering legislation in the UK and elsewhere in Europe to a business activity in the illegal settlements. This isn't just moral. This is illegal. This isn't just immoral, should I say. This is illegal. And we're taking action here to stop that. Because otherwise, we're saying it's cool for these people to continue to extract from Palestinian land. And that should be a no-go from all of us.
Thank you, Ashish. 100%. It does definitely deal into normalizing the settlements that have already been pretty normalized worldwide, even though they are very much illegal under international law. So I think you guys taking this precedent and taking legal action against Airbnb for being complicit in Israeli war crimes is super important. And this dives us into the next question of how you feel like taking legal action like this, or kind of this modem of activism, because this is activism, you may be working in the confines of the system, but this is still very much activism. How do you feel like these tactics are important to the overall BDS movement?
Well, BDS has its clear goals. I think sometimes my frustration is we're not moving fast enough, right? So it's not a knock on BDS. It's more that it's a methodical, long process. I want to actually take a step back and make a comparison. South Africa's apartheid, words from South African leaders like Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, they describe Palestine as worse than what they went through. And they aren't living through today's genocide. Those two have both passed away. That was before they passed away. We know it's 100 times worse than even that, 1,000 times worse than even what we've experienced. And yet the demands of the boycott movement in South Africa were 1,000 times stronger than what we're going through. So my frustration with BDS is I love what we're doing, but you need to mobilize us to do a lot more, a lot harder, a lot faster, because again, also time is different. The apartheid was different. They weren't exterminating Black South Africans. They needed them to be the labor force. So BDS is operating in a timeline where like they believe that the existence of Palestinians is still important to Israelis. Well, clearly that's not true. Like we're watching Palestinians be ethnically cleansed at a rate that has never occurred in human history. And the tactics are built for a timeline where we expect, both populations still have exist in 10 years. And if the Israelis get their way, that's not going to happen. So, the BDS is really powerful, but it's incumbent with these actions that you, the public, also follow up. Because here's the thing. We believe we're going to win. Airbnb also in their response to this case basically admitted they were doing wrong publicly on the record. And we were like so surprised but also not surprised given the arrogance of technology and the tech sector in the United States. They basically admitted to money laundering, which is perfect. So the case we believe will be a success and could lead to precedent, as I mentioned, where other companies now would be guilty of war crimes and their executives could be exposed to criminal cases, not civil cases, criminal cases. Executives could go to jail to continue to do this. Now, but to accelerate it, and that's the key, right? Like this case could take a year, maybe two, but you can accelerate it. The case is there. We know they're guilty. There's no one on this call who doesn't know they aren't guilty. But everybody should be boycotting them at a massive rate and letting them know and letting Brian Chesky know why you're boycotting them. This isn't about, we spend so much time being polite. We're like, okay, so we're going to leave the app and delete it. Leave the app and tell them why. But then also on LinkedIn, on whatever other platform he sits on, let it be known that he is ethnically cleansing and he is participating in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Right? It's really important that thousands, if not millions of you just not just leave Airbnb and cripple them financially in advance while this case is happening. Don't just leave it on the lawyers. Act now and accelerate the actions, because if you don't accelerate the actions, this case might be too late. I believe we're going to win. I believe it's going to get the Israeli occupation out of these territories and maybe even 48 collapses. But if we're going to stop the ethnic cleansing, we need to collapse the business now so that the business has to pull out earlier than even this case's judgment. And that's where you play a vital role in this. And it's not about just deleting the app and closing your account. It's about letting them know why.
Very true. And shameless plug now, we do have a new action that coincides with this with this webinar with this week, where you can send a letter straight to the executives of Airbnb, so Brian Chesky and I believe two other executives, telling them what they're doing wrong, and why their company is complicit in these war crimes. So I think Grace has sent the letter in the chat. You guys can go ahead and send it. It takes, literally less than 30 seconds. But definitely like letting these companies know what they have a hand in, what they have a role in. Because at the end of the day, they may not seem to care when you try to come at it through a humanitarian lens, because these people they love profit. But like you said, you guys have this added ammo of like, we are now holding legal repercussions against you and we will win. And this is going to set a really like legendary precedent for other corporations, because corporations really they're accelerating the genocide in Gaza with Israel. So this moves us into our next question for Ashish. So beyond this like legal scope that you are kind of working through, what are some more like important tactics or new tactics that you've seen to be effective, and where do you think our movement could be more creative? I think you kind of touched on this, but go ahead and touch on
Yeah,
it.
I mean, look, what I said earlier on, I mean, I think we need to be more radical in our thinking. We always wait for the end result before we act. We should be preempting that decision, right? Like I think about the unions in Europe. They literally now, oh, look, the flotilla got bombed tonight. They should be striking tomorrow morning. This isn't even a discussion. They should be striking. If from Marseille to Barcelona to Genoa, all these ports that bring in literally all the supplies for Europe should be shut down tomorrow. And they should send gunships to protect the flotilla all the way to Gaza. That is exactly what should be happening. There isn't a, what's really fascinating is also watch out on the 10th of September, there is actually a shutdown movement starting in France. They're going to shut down all the major cities and block all avenues in and out to economically cripple France until they get some changes on what's happening. Why are we not doing that? Look, and I know that these countries, are smaller economically, and also smaller in size. So you can mobilize a population in a way you can not necessarily mobilize them in what I would call half a continent, that is the United States of America. But still, power is concentrated, and economic power is concentrated in the United States, and they have all these vulnerabilities, like the harbors in our country are still harbors. We should be lobbying our unions to act, right? And I understand people go, well, they have their jobs, all this stuff, but like we're watching a generational crime. This is unprecedented times, and they will. I always think to people's reasoning of not acting is that they feel isolated. We're in a moment right now, it's probably the safest it's been in 2 years to act. Like, I think no one had an excuse on day one, but it's pretty much the safest it's ever been to act. If union leaders and unions stood up and actually took charge and shut down the country to stop us sending military weapons or any other form of thing, we're not going to continue to let's send weapons, so we're going to cut the supply chain in the United States. That's a day of it and it's over. I think we overestimate the power of the executive, of the institutions of our government so much, the complicity just doesn't start with just the West, right? I always say, Jordan and Egypt should be doing this. They're complicit too. They literally let aid into Israel, right? So this isn't exclusively to you all watching here now. It is everybody. Like, we have a massive role as populations of our countries, because the beautiful thing about capitalism is it's fragile. And we spend so much time believing it's impossible to break. It can't be, what can my action do? Well, the French believe shutting every bridge in Paris is going to cripple the country. And they're only using a few thousand people to do that. And it will cripple the economy of France for a week, however long I think it runs from the 10th to the 16th. And they're public about it, but the police just don't have the manpower to stop the public. Nous sommes le pouvoir. We are the power. They believe it. They believe they're going to shut this thing down. They believe they're going to get changed by shutting it down. Why aren't we doing that everywhere? And that is the key, right? Yes, it's more direct action, but I still go back to, we are watching a live stream genocide. It's about time. I think Mohammed El-Khed put it best. What are you willing to risk? What are you willing to give up? What are you willing to sacrifice? And that's easy for me to say. Yes, I can speak to what we've sacrificed. But we need to make sure that if we all do it, by the way, the sacrifice isn't as big if we're all doing it. That is also the thing. Again, they are scared of us mobilizing. And I think that's why I touched on that earlier on, but we could be doing this at scale at a lot faster rate. That's the part that's missing. We're waiting for orders a lot of the time. Boycott this because it's approved on a list. Why wait? Get the next protest you have, instead of just marching in a line, disrupt the city.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely in a moment where, I mean, honestly, I think urgency was needed October 8th. Um, but I mean, I completely see where you're coming from. And I think, like, America has set up this system, especially now with Trump in office, and he's putting National Guard in, like he's instating that the National Guard in many cities across America. We're kind of living in like this complacentness because I think people are very scared of the state. Um, and Trump is kind of like making sure that like that's how people feel. That there's like ICE agents and National Guard agents around every corner. So you have to watch what you're doing. You have to, like, we're policed. Um, but I think you're right. Like, if everyone's doing something, the sacrifice is always less because it's a
Can I also
unified,
just say, look at farmers in the South. They
yeah.
pushed back. I don't know if all of you've seen this. It got so much coverage in Europe. Literally, a small group of 4 farmers, black and white, threatened to shoot ICE officers if they stepped on their property. They were willing to throw down with the government. Like, I'm not saying everybody needs to pick up a gun, but they were willing to protect people who were on their property.
Hmm.
And potentially, given the given the lack of accountability that Trump is allowing his agents to operate with, um, that was a risk. And
Hmm.
what was noticed in the clip, and it's why it got picked up so much, is how quickly guys with just bad, all the authority is just a badge, quickly turned around and packed up and left. Because resistance is your principles and how you act. One day of resistance is like more valuable than thousands of days under the boot of your occupier or your oppressor or your fascist government. And I want to say also, like, we're talking about Trump. Biden created this environment. I don't want people to pretend otherwise. Like, we have cases against the former president. What is not talked about enough is the quote unquote list of Palestinians that have been abducted by ICE since Trump unleashed them in March, were put together by Antony Blinken. Our state's been oppressive for a long time. And what we need to do is make sure that as a public, we're more united. I go back to the teachings of Fred Hampton. I think it's really interesting what's happening right now across America, right? We are watching Tucker Carlson talk about this. We are watching Candace Owens talk about this. We're watching Marjorie Taylor Greene stand at a podium criticizing our aid to the entity. And there's still resistance to working with them. But that's because we're in an era where people have made us divided by our little political indifferent ideologies. I'm not saying I agree with them on everything or anything, but I agree with them on Palestine. Right? In this moment, in this time when there's a genocide taking place, I agree with them on Palestine. And Fred Hampton thought this. Remember, he didn't ask Confederates to put their flag down before they came to the meeting with him. He asked to work with them, and then they put their Confederate flag down. That is what we need to do more of. That is what we need to be. That's what we need to do to unify the class, to undo the oppression we're facing at home in the United States, but also to end the occupation in Israel, in Palestine, by the Israelis. That is how we're power. That's our power. We still limit ourselves by our small political ideological beliefs, I think. Who we'll work with? Oh my God, I feel paranoid. What's their agenda? Because they're on the right normally. How about sometimes they saw as many dismembered kids as you and me and decided that's it. That's enough. And with Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'll share something I know personally. She now wakes up every day and prays with the pastor of Bethlehem. Like, I don't know anyone on the left doing that, and I am progressive and on the left. I'm just like, I don't know anyone I know doing that. But something has changed her on this issue. I'm not saying on every issue, but on this issue. And we should welcome that and partner together to break down this occupation, this entity, and use those powers. Because she's as supportive as anyone on this call of stopping arms, and we need to be working with that. She'd also be supportive, I believe, of people taking direct action to stop arms. And we need to think about we need to think of like Fred Hampton on this and build bigger coalitions to move our agenda forward of preventing this occupation from continuing.
Um, these are all amazing points. And I always say that I never thought I would live to see the day where people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson are somehow advocating for my homeland of Palestine. And that just means that we live in a really weird and warped timeline. And I think like what I was, um, obviously not absolving who they are as people, but I think that's what I was trying to say is that like we live now in a state in the US where the complacency comes from like these political divides and these, you know, these party clashes. But like you said, it really just transcends party lines. Like this really is just everyone has been complicit and we need to hold these people accountable. Um, yeah, and I think you kind of answered the next question. Just before we go into the next question, we know I think we can go into it more. Um, I just do want to preface, just for the legality reasons, CODEPINK is a nonviolent organization, so obviously, that's how we advocate for action to be taken. So, how do you think everyday people can really tap into these things, like these action items, kind of transcending what we're doing now, but kind of more in a way that, intertwines with BDS or like more accessible things for people to do that maybe aren't willing to kind of
Right.
go that far.
There's a saying one more step, right? Look at the BDS list and what one more step can you take beyond that? Right. That is the key. Yeah, that's the key, right? Like it's like how much further can you go, right, on that individual choice? BDS list is great. I saw everyone boycott Starbucks. I saw everyone boycott McDonald's, and you've crippled Starbucks. It's kind of insane. I could never believe it. But what did it actually get us? I think we need to be more strategic. The reason the Airbnb is really powerful is it's literally enforcing the occupation, right? Starbucks gives free coffee to the Israelis. It sucks. It's evil. Like whatever. We need to be more focused on what will economically damage the occupation. That is where it's at. Too many companies on even that BDS list, I think, are a waste of time. Personally, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I think we should. I just think if we're talking about ending the current genocide, the current thing that's happening, we need to hurt them and break them. And that requires focusing on the companies that enforce that. The tech industry. That is the biggest actual proponent of this genocide. And I know everyone's going to say, hey, it's really hard to like get off Amazon, Google. And it is. But if enough of us do it, if enough of us limit the kinds of platforms we do or work with, it's really important, right, to narrow that. So yes, instead of using Microsoft, there are many other alternatives. We just need to be thoughtful about finding them. Like we need to think about how that works, so that interacts with our day-to-day life. Also, by the way, like the funny thing that that I've noticed also in the tech world itself, none of their children use tech. Just so you know, so everybody else out here is reliant on this stuff, right? But all the executives will not allow their children any of their own technology, which should tell you all you need to know. I think that's a really important thing when we pull together how we operate as well. The tech industry, the retailers that are connected to the occupation, right? Some of the other stuff is just it's a long-term play from BDS, but it's a waste of time today. I'm focused on the genocide is what we should be focused on, right? And that's why we have to target the companies that we're going to boycott even more in a more focused way to actually punish the Israeli occupation. However, when I know you mentioned the non-violence thing, I believe direct action can be non-violent too. Standing in the middle of a bridge, or on a train line, stopping the economy running is non-violent. Martin Luther King is a proponent of that, right? Like I remember during the anti-apartheid movement in the UK, people literally threw, maybe it's because British Rail is not very good, but they used to throw bags of trash on the rail line, so they had to stop running trains, like at several points in the busiest time of year. Now, technically non-violent, right? It depends on your definition of it, but like those really basic things crippled economies for days, and that drove people to go, well, we should strike. It drove the RMT union here to strike. They're like, well, they're not going to let us drive the train, so we're going to strike. It drives other change, but you have to be willing to act to do that. I know there's a lot of fear. I know, I was just in Paris this week, and the main Palestinian group there is about to be prescribed as a terrorist organization. It's a joke. It is a joke that they're going to be prescribed in that way. There's no fear there. They look at their comrades in Gaza, and there's no fear. That they will continue to go, they've said, even if they're prescribed and are all arrested. Like, that is like real solidarity. That is real commitment to ending what's going on there. A lot of fear is driven by reputation. I go back to, there is more of us than them, right? And that's when I think about those farmers who took that decision. There was only 4 of them against 10, but they felt the officers' fear. I think if you had 100,000 standing on a bridge and only like a couple of thousand cops trying to police that, you're not going to be able to handle it. It's about your willingness to put your collective together to organize. That's the key. Organize, because yes, doing it alone is fear. There is fear for all of us, but there's nothing more I want than to be on that flotilla. If it's up to me, instead of launching something I'm launching next week, which is important, I'd be on the next boat out. My partner would be on the next boat out. That's what we should be doing. What else matters? I think we need to think about our choices. And I know people are gonna say, oh, this sounds crazy. But the degree of fascism that is being placed on us by Western economies and governments right now is insane. And we're letting it happen because we're moving slowly, thinking they're never going to go the next step further. Israel and what they do to Palestine is the model. And, I don't think you should only care because it will happen to us. I think you should care because they are human beings and our kin, wherever they are in the world. But if you do tolerate that, it will happen to you. This isn't a game or a joke. They are ripping up and shredding up international law. Someone's posted a comment saying, "What does international law matter anymore?" Well, yes, they're trying to shred it up to create a normal where they can take that those actions out on you. And if you don't believe that, it's already happened with Iraq. I remember in 2003 when the first drones were flying over Iraq. So people said that would never happen over American or European cities. Well, now drones police us. Just remember, they try it there so they can do it here. So it's not about just self-protection. It is about the protection of people in Palestine. It is on us to do everything. But, when you think about it, you're also salvaging our future too at the same time. Liberation there, that means liberation here. And I think, I believe in a lot of, non-violent, whatever language you want to use around it, direct action's going to be the biggest way to stop this right now. Right, is alongside economic acts, direct action, and you can lobby your unions to do this. By the way, too, they are vulnerable. Their members are on our side. By the way, it's about leadership, and they just need to hear from you. If you are connected in a union, and if you're not connected to a union, you need to find a group of people who are and push that agenda. Because in the end of the day, I believe more the members are aligned with all the people on this call than maybe their leadership is, and they need to be pushed.
Thank you, Ashish. This is actually really, really inspiring. I feel like people really need to hear this in a time like right now where I think people can feel dejected about next steps, um, and what they're doing personally. So that's all the questions that I have on my end, but now I'm gonna move on to the audience's questions. Um, so I'm just gonna read from the list that I have here, and then we'll see how much we can get through. So the first question that I have is, what were the main demands of the South African boycott, sanctions movement that are not part of BDS or Palestine, and which Ashish believes that we could be pursuing right now?
It's not the demands are different. Demands were more aggressive. There were the timelines. There was timelines set. There was more aggression towards it. There was more direct action against the individual companies that were partaking in the apartheid. It wasn't just boycott them. It was about going after them. It was much more radical. And I think we're playing by the occupation and America's rules right now, and not not the same. And again, I go back to the conditions were better. I hate saying comparative statements like that. They were less bad than what the Palestinians were experiencing, again, by Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela's words, in the 2010s. Obviously, it's a lot worse today. And yet their push, their agenda to get companies to leave and divest and was much more aggressive. It was more aggressive in the student movement. And I know we've seen unprecedented shutdown of students, and that's uniquely tied to the fact this is the Israeli occupation and not white apartheid South Africa. But they were just much more aggressive. And I think the fundamental truth is that we have to combine with our choice to boycott with direct action against those companies. It's got to be all of it. I'll give you a good example of how you could apply this in government, right? I'll just say the UK right now quickly, because there's a bigger example in the US. But people have been appealing to our government to stop sending F-35 and other weapon parts and other weapons to the Israeli occupation. Now, we've spent 2 years appealing to the same 2 or 3 foreign secretaries and prime ministers. Nothing's changed. Why are we not focused on the people that sign the weapons licenses? Yes, the foreign secretary, the secretary of state in the US's case, or the president or the prime minister, they don't actually sign the paperwork. They don't do the work. In the UK, there's a department of 92 people, and Department of Business it's called, because it's a business, because they sell weapons, not even the MOD, not even the Defense Department. Why not publicly name all those 92 people? Why not make sure all of the United Kingdom knows that they sell weapons to kill children? They're civil servants. They drop their child, like I do, to school. They have to go to the grocery store. And their website, they're finding their names. They're all public employees. It's difficult. Why aren't we focusing our attacks on them and not the politicians that will not move? Why aren't we doing that to the US civil servants? We always say, oh, they're just, wait, following orders? Doesn't that sound familiar? Yeah, it should sound familiar. They're sending weapons. It's not following orders. You're part of the system that is exterminating a civilization. Everybody should know you played your role and you followed orders. That's what I mean about being more aggressive. We are still appealing to a handful of snakish politicians in the Senate and Congress and the parliaments of Europe who will not move. But they also do that knowing behind security and guards. And, I've seen CODEPINK, have thrown out of Congress by policemen who actually shouldn't have any right to expel them in the House of the People, but they do. Civil servants don't have that protection. And without them, government doesn't work. And in a perfect scenario, those 92 people in the UK are named and harangued in life, and then within a week they decide to strike, shut the department down, then no weapons go. That's what we should be doing, and that's when I talk about the boycott part is important. The demands for divestment are important, but we need to be more aggressive, and that's companies too, right? We need to make executives know that we know they're complicit in war crimes. Arms companies, building companies, CAT, all these companies that provide all the tools that allow Israel to build settlements should know, the executives should know that we know who they are, what they do, and make sure that their lives are made hell peacefully alongside the company being boycotted.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree. Targeted boycotts, along with, actionable mobilization behind them. That's what we need at this point. Heavy on the tech corporations. I went on a really dangerous rabbit hole last night, actually, about Palantir. And yeah, we're living in a world where techno-fascism is at the hand of the genocide in Gaza and at the hand of genocides all over the world. So, amazing point that you're putting there. Um, Next question from the audience. Um, do you think the tide is turning worldwide? There are like 42 sponsors of a bill in Congress to stop spending weapons. That's the most we've had.
Obviously, I don't have to, like, the people have spoken. It's now politicians. There isn't a country in the world which isn't not just pro-Palestinian, anti-genocide, pro-Palestinian, sympathetic to what's going on. There isn't a country. The populations are pretty much all on side. Even at the heart of the empire, I believe. Again, look who's talking about it. You know, you only have to look at my favorite example. I refuse to still watch him, even though he's been very good on Palestine. Is Tucker Carlson's interview with that nun. Look at the comments below it. That's all you have to do. That's all you have to do. And you realize how many people's minds have changed. Again, it doesn't mean that like Tucker's good on every other issue. It doesn't mean he doesn't believe America should be white. Loads of things. But on Palestine, he's changing opinions. On Palestine, he's moving the country. And that's happening in the US. So other countries are way further ahead on this because we don't have like the lobby, the Zionist lobby in the same way as the United States with AIPAC. And we don't have, I mean, the UK has something similar, but not as dramatic as AIPAC. But other countries are falling by the wayside. Populations are demanding loads of things. The rush to recognize Palestine as a state, while I think is meaningless from a lot of these countries, it's being rushed because they're desperate to show they're doing something. They're desperate because no matter, even with Trump's threats of you can't do it, they're doing it principally because they know the populations are going to like overthrow them at some point. That's actually very tangible. They're that scared. Otherwise, there's no incentive. The genocide's continuing. Why would the UK and France get behind it? They're getting behind it because they're worried about where their populations are going. They're throwing like scraps, hoping that that will slow the descent around Palestine. But also the United States. I mean, like I said, like we have really ridiculous individuals speaking about this issue and have changed the public opinion. So I think the public is with us. Now, politicians, that's why I go that we still need to act more because politicians still are so distant. They've been so distant to us on so many issues for so long. Remember that. This isn't like new. The issue, I mean, look, how many of you wanted people prosecuted for Iraq? I know people from every side of the aisle that wanted people prosecuted for Iraq. I think it was one of Barack Obama's biggest crimes. The drones, no, all that was not prosecuting a single person for Iraq. And I'll tell you why it's the biggest crime. Because Gaza wouldn't happen today if Bush and co went to jail. Because it would have shown that war crimes would have been held accountable. That's the biggest crime he ever committed. And I bring that up because we don't pressure. The disconnect is the public kind of wanted it. And I know, at least I can speak to the UK, 100% wanted Tony Blair in jail. But nobody wanted to act on it. And we get Gaza. I believe the majority of Americans by the 2008 election knew that Iraq was built on a lie. So many soldiers came home broken by it and had committed war crimes, so they're sympathetic to everyone. So they're both hits of it, both parts of it. We sacrificed a generation of Iraqis for oil, and we sacrificed a generation of our men and women who went there to serve. I believe the country wanted accountability, but it was never given to them, right? And that's the disconnect there was huge. And that disconnect has got bigger since then. So to move politicians is going to be hard, but that's where your actions will move them. But also interactions will move them. MTG was changed by a priest, right? If you constantly connect, it will work too. It's the longer game, but that's why it has to combine with other things you're doing economically, societally. Everything else works hand in hand to make it happen. And unfortunately, we don't have 10 years like apartheid South Africa. They should never have been in apartheid for that long, but they weren't getting wiped out. So we had time. We don't have time. So we need to do all these things together to prevent this from being finished. in front of our eyes and never being able to, shouldn't be able to live with ourselves right now, but never be able to live with ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you, 100%. Um, although we're not screaming into a void, essentially, and
No.
that's always good to know. Okay, last question from the audience. Can Ashish briefly update us about the no tax for genocide campaign? And we need to do the same here in US.
Yeah, so we have a legal way to do it. We had so the goal was to get 100,000 people to sign up because that would have knocked 1 billion off the UK Treasury at the time, and the UK economy is tiny compared to the US, right? So I think a lot of states are bigger than the UK economy. So 1 billion is a lot. We unfortunately got up to about 32,000 people do it, and they've committed to actually not paying the tax, and they still pay no tax, which is still a huge knock. So every time you see news that the UK economy is struggling, it's partly because 32,000 tax-paying individual people of tax-paying age are not paying their tax. No one's been prosecuted in the UK, even though they've threatened it multiple times. And I think it's because prosecution will require them to debate whether this is actually a genocide in a court. And that's what I talked to you about, the bluff, the threat, the intimidation. 32,000 people thought it was good enough for them to take the risk. And they know still that they won't go to jail, not without a day in court. And that court day will require a government lawyer to debate whether this is a genocide or not. And the UK doesn't want that on public record. And that is why those individuals will continue. Now, would I like it to be hundreds and thousands more? Of course. Should more people act? I clearly need to put more time into that campaign to bring it back about. So we launched it in the first 4 months of the genocide. I'm sure today we'd have more people join. But we need to think like that could actually cripple the European economy. Now, obviously, the US is a behemoth, but Trump is actually crippling the economy by himself right now. So could you imagine if loads of people didn't pay tax on top of that? That is really powerful, And yes, I know the brutality of the US is a lot worse. But where there is chaos, there's opportunity. Donald Trump creates his own chaos and mess, and there is opportunity in that, whether through foreign policy. I think we've at a moment, just to go off topic for 1 second, we're at a moment where NATO might dissolve, right? Donald Trump did that for us. NATO should dissolve, shouldn't exist. I don't like him, don't want him in office, but my God, he's created a fissure between Europe and America for the first time in a generation. That is a good thing. This hegemonic view of the Western world being a dominant power should be broken apart. Like, yes, countries should have their own relations with other countries. They shouldn't be dictated by DC of who they should bomb. The NATO should come undone. And where there is chaos, there's opportunity. And I think we can still do the same with tax and everything else. The chaos he's caused to the economy through his tariffs and all of that nonsense that he's created, self-inflicted, frankly, can create an opportunity for us to further damage the U.S. economy, which could the tax campaign could do in the U.S. as well.
Thank you so
Telling
much.
me I'm off topic.
I know I saw that. The chat is keeping you in check, I guess. But I think it was all great and on topic. So yeah. Thank you so much for the amazing. I found this really inspirational, like motivational. It's refreshing to like talk about new tactics and what more that we can do, and also just knowing the work that's being done beyond America. So sometimes we're in like a little bit of an echo chamber here. So thank you so much, Ashish, for joining us today and talking about your experience and the work that you do. Um, to end off this amazing session, I want the audience to leave this webinar energized and engaged in taking action for Palestine. These are some really easy ways and action items to take, but they're effective as they let Airbnb execs know, like we talked about, that there is widespread pressure on them to make the decision that they had made before in 2018 and before as well. Now, with all the lawsuits against the corporation, we truly have every advantage on our side and can cause a huge stride in the Palestine BDS movement if we get Airbnb to move again. So now it's more important than ever to take action for Palestine, no matter how small or big. And I think Grace will resend all the action items that we have for this week. But we have an Airbnb petition that we have out, which we're trying to get to 10,000 signatures to deliver to the Airbnb office. We have an Airbnb letter to send to Airbnb execs to let them know directly that they're complicit in Israeli war crimes. We've made a flyer that you guys can all fly around your towns, around your coffee shops, around your institutions, in your cities to spread awareness about Airbnb and its complicity. And we're also having a calling party on this Friday, September 12th, to call up Airbnb directly and tell them that they're complicit. So thank you guys so much for joining. I'm gonna pass this off to Grace to close off the webinar.
Thank you, Ashish, Janine, and everyone for joining our first night of our Anti-Imperialist Campaign Action Series. Ashish reminded us that our daily commitments to peace are what pushes the movement forward and what slowly erodes the systems we are trying to dismantle. We all have a position here online, in person, in our cities and our communities, in this movement towards justice for Palestine and for the planet. We have a duty to the people of Palestine and to each other, like Ashish said, to speak out and act out against militarism happening here in the US, in the belly of the beast, in the United Kingdom, in every inch of the world that the US imperialist system touches. I'm so grateful to be amongst leaders like Ashish, like Janine, like everybody on this call who are pushing our goals of liberation forward. And there's still so much to do, like we've talked about all night long. We have our first action, like Janine said, at 10 a.m. Eastern on Friday, calling the folks over at Airbnb, telling them to stop listing properties on stolen land. And we have more webinars, articles, resources, uh, everything ready to make sure we are doing our daily duties for Palestine and for peace. You can find all of these actions on our campaign action series landing page, and you can always email us directly at info@codepink.org to get more involved locally, globally, online, wherever we can meet you. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.